What's up, everybody? Oh, welcome to the State of Wild, episode 111, a regular YouTube video web series podcast thingy. My name's Meowth, and as usual, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Corbett. But today, no Roffle. He is being replaced by famous Hearthstone streamer Engine. Engine, what's up, dude? Thank you so much for filling in. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. Thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm good. Very happy to have Engine here with us today. No, I don't know. I feel good. I've had a good week. I was feeling a little bit run down, and it's kind of on the up and up. You know, sleep schedule's back, daylight savings. I dealt with all that bullshit whenever that happens, and so you know, I'm back to normal.
Oh, did you get back into the swing of things after just like a week?
Yeah. You know, I
It's kind of
adapt.
impressive.
Overcome.
It takes me
Thank
6
you.
months until the next daylight savings time to adjust, and then by that time it happens again, and you're screwed.
Yeah.
But I mean, lots of stuff to talk about. I'm excited to be back. We got a nerf patch, balance patch, whatever you want to call it. It's a little sad for Wild, but we'll dive into it. Real quick, we got 4 changes. I'm gonna do a lot of reading from the patch notes here. We're gonna start with Theotar, a very polarizing card, I think I would say, very confidently. Got moved from 4 mana to 5. Still the same effect. How impactful do you guys think, and how has it been? I think it's been 5 days, or not 5 days, 3-4 days of playing with this card. By the time we're recording this podcast episode, how impactful do you think the nerf has been for Theotar?
Well, I'll say I've only played WoW for 1 day since I've taken a few days break, but played it a bunch today. I played it in quite a few different decks. I saw a lot less of it, and when I played it, the difference was, I'd say, a tiny bit noticeable. The only time I really noticed it is when I was playing against things like Pillager Rogue. In particular, was a particularly rough time to have it in your hand, because that one turn really matters, especially on the turn 4 to 5 crunch. But a lot of the other decks I was playing it against didn't seem to really matter. I was playing these clunky Highlander decks, so I didn't notice it too much. I think any slowing down of a card like this in Wild by 1 mana is a huge nerf, though, overall going forward for this card. But yeah, I didn't really notice the change too much today, but I think that's just where the meta is at the moment. Druid is the one other place I've seen some interesting ideas where you can now run it with Oaken summons, of course. But I didn't try that out myself.
Yeah, kind of the same thing where for the most part, it hasn't felt like it's too big of a deal going to 5, you know? Like, the positions where it's instantly game-winning and things like that, it's mostly the same. You know, like, it does mean it's probably a little bit harder to kind of loop the card, because, like, the later you play it, the less likely it is to stick, and so you can't, like, Zola it or Seance it, or maybe you can't get the Brand Theo going as much. But for the most part, it felt like pretty negligible. And yeah, totally what Engine's saying, the Oaken summons thing is actually pretty funny, and not really something I was thinking about too much when the nerf was announced. And then all of a sudden, they started making a slow Druid deck, and I put my Theotar in, and I was like, oh, that's new. Like, I hadn't done that before, like, without thinking about it. So yeah, it seems like to 5, not the biggest deal, and I think it'll still be a pretty strong disruptor in Wild. And it probably would have had to go to 6, I think, or maybe get a rework to, you know, to really get pushed out of the format.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest impact is going to be when you're playing like slow greed piles versus other slow greed piles, because of this what you were talking about, where like it's really hard now, or a lot harder to do the looping, which was like the really gross part of like Reno Priest Mirrors, is like when you play 12 Theotars between the two of you guys in like the span of 4 or 5 turns, because you just keep looping them. And I think it'll still be impactful, like you said, against combo. I don't know, Pillager can kill you on turn 4, so I guess maybe now you're a little bit less consistent at disrupting that. But I think the bigger impact is in the slow control mirrors.
Yeah.
All right, so it does seem like Theotar still playable in Wild. Corb, have you really had your finger on the impact that it's had on in Standard? Like, are we potentially looking at another Theotar nerf, or maybe a Mindra and Duralucia solution where they just gotta rework the card and kill it?
I haven't really been keeping up too much. Like, I think the play rate of the card is still like stupidly high. I think it has dropped off in performance, but I don't think that necessarily matters very much, right? Like whether the card looks good or not, the point is I'm looking it up now, it's still in 45% of decks. In standard right now at Diamond, which is just behind the same cards, Renathal, Bran, Denathrius, Theo. So in terms of play rate, it hasn't really done very much. That said, it's very early. Like, people aren't going to change their decks necessarily. But it seems like people are still happy playing it. And that's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, they did say that the goal of this nerf was not really necessarily power focused, but play rate focused, because he feels really bad to lose to.
Well, I think they've done the opposite, if that's the case.
It feels very much like a ticketed situation where, like, even though the card might not be good, people love playing cards like that, and so they keep shoving it in their deck. They did say that if the play rate doesn't drop off significantly with the change, that they're probably going to look at another set of changes to Theotar, which is a little bit spooky, because we have talked on the podcast a little bit about kind of the impact that it's had on the metagame. Obviously, the combination of him and Renathal, but kind of scared to see what would happen if Theotar kind of just got straight up deleted, like Lucia did.
Yeah, that would concern me a lot as well. I think, unlike Lucia, those is a prime candidate for something that would be reverted eventually, right? If it ever rotates.
I mean, you say that,
but it's not quite as polarizing as Lucia. I don't think the whole Lucia in aggro thing was part of the reason that whole thing was deleted, right? Because it was taking extra turn. But I think that this bump isn't enough to reduce its play rate, and that says they'll evaluate it at the next chance, and I think they'll definitely be doing that. These neutral bombs are all over standard at the moment, and Theotar, he still does the same thing, steals whatever card you use to win the game. Feels like it's 100% when they play it against you, takes you to Nathris. It's magnetic, and that's still going to happen. It's still going to feel awful, and people will jam it in the deck because they love the card, right? They absolutely love it. So yeah.
We've had a lot of conversation about our general feelings on Theotar. Generally, I think when we've talked about it, we see it as a net positive. I personally had mostly polarizing feelings on it, but I thought it was probably a net positive in Wild. Engine, where do you land with Theo? Previously, when he was at 4, and also now. How do you feel about it in general?
About Theotar in general. I definitely think there's a bit of bias here, where you notice the times you lose to it a lot more, and those weigh on your mind a lot more in Hearthstone when you lose to a card like this. So immediately when you say Theotar, I just think of a quest reward being stolen, my Denathrius going, and I think, oh, for goodness sake, why is this around? But then I think of the amount of times that it's given the jank I like to play. I'm a fan of my janky strategies and trying to bolstering out the left field like Reno Paladin or Quest Priest, whatever, some stupid deck that I'm playing. And Theotar gave me a chance against something like Pillager, where I didn't really have a chance before to introduce those strategies. Renathal definitely helped as well. But overall, I think Theotar for Wild has been a net positive. I agree with you. Just it gives a fighting chance to some of these decks. I'm just worried, as I say to my stream, do you see more cards like Theotar? I say no, because one day it's just going to absolutely bowl over, and you'll play Theotar on 4, this new tech Murloc on 5, something on 6, Mutanus on 7, and it will be like playing a card like Theotar every single turn. So I think it's a net positive up until you get to that point, because currently we're not quite there, but some games it really can feel like that, especially in the Reno Priest mirrors, as you were saying. I play a lot of that, and oh crikey. Yeah, the amount of times you can play this card in one game, it becomes it's confusing for a start. It's frustrating for both players, I think, because you've got the frustration on both sides with this card. For the player, because they might miss what they're aiming for. For the person it's played against, because something gets stolen from them. I don't know. I can see myself becoming frustrated with it. That's what I said when it came out. I think it's a great card, but I'm gonna hate it. I'm gonna hate it in a few months' time, and I think I'm starting down that road. But I love playing the card. Yeah.
This feels like exactly the conversation we had a few weeks ago, right? Where we were just like, yeah, I hate when it's played against me, but I love playing it because it beats the combo decks, right? And it sounds like you're in the same boat as we were.
Oh, definitely.
I still, 4 weeks later, still don't know how I feel about the card even after it's been nerfed. Where like, I do think it's good, right? But like, maybe in an ideal world we wouldn't need it to deal with Pillager, because Pillager wouldn't be a thing, right? Or things like that. So
it's a symptom. It's a symptom of the game.
Yeah.
Things like this are necessary, but they shouldn't be.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not gonna lie to you. I wouldn't be surprised in the next balance patch that we get to see another Theotar nerf. Like, I would not be surprised if Theotar ended up rotating at like 7 or 8 mana, or like completely reworked. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up warsonging the card, and I'm a little scared of what that might mean for Wild. I will say a lot of people kind of just will say that Theotar is the reason we don't see a ton of like Pillager Rogue or Quest Mage, and I don't know if it's just Theotar that's doing that. I don't know what y'all's opinion on that is. Like, if Theotar got deleted from Wild, like, would it be a Pillager Rogue Quest Mage combo fiesta?
No, I don't think so. But firstly, because on the Quest Mage front, I feel like this card does not a whole lot into Quest Mage. Firstly, from my experience, I never actually get a chance to play it where it's impactful upon their game plan. It feels the only time you can really play it is if you're at 4 mana and they just played a Crush Core in 4, so that feels like the best time ever to play it against Quest Mage, because they never leave their reward in hand. Playing at higher legend, it just doesn't happen, and it doesn't really, I don't think, swing that match up too hard. But against Pillager Rogue, often, it's. I don't think it would lead to a dominating meta, because before Theotar existed, I play on EU, which is a different server to you guys, but I don't see a lot of Pillager Rogue beforehand. It's the same players that are spamming it all the time, the Rala B and that. So and they're continuing to spam the deck and kill me on 4 anyway, even though Theotar's the thing. Sure, I might win one more game in every 10, but mostly just don't draw him half the time. I don't think it would change a whole lot, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't think Theotar, like, if Theotar was disappearing, I don't think all of a sudden everyone's going to be playing Pillager. Because, again, like Andrew was saying, Pillager's not ever been popular. Like, it's a very niche high legend deck, and even at high legend, like, it's still not that popular anyway. And I also think that currently, like, things like Quest Mage are already getting very suppressed by Secret Mage. Secret Mage coming back is still, like, just a brutal situation for both those decks. I think it's kind of like a natural... Yeah. There's already so much natural hostility towards those decks now. But I don't see them like overwhelmingly coming back. So I don't think Theotar's the savior. I just think Theotar is the savior for certain decks. Like when you are playing that Reno Priest, you do want that chance. You do have that like get out card. Which, probably doesn't affect things a ton overall, but it affects things a ton for the Reno Priest.
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe that's why like the outcry is so loud, right? Because people loved Reno Priest, they love it being back, and then they probably attribute that to Theotar, and so they don't really want to see that go. Again, all of this is purely speculative. We'll see what happens, right? We'll see what happens the next balance patch. We'll see if Theotar at 5 is enough to eventually get people to stop playing it in standard. I have my doubts too. We will see though. I am interested to see if these 3 Hunter nerfs that we got will get people to stop playing Hunter in Standard, so that they stop nerfing our baby in Wild. I am in Corb's boat. These 3 changes that I'm about to talk about were super sad to see, but also not surprising at all. They did nerf so Big Beast Hunter actually in Standard, which was pretty clearly the best deck in the format, and it just happens that the 3 nerfs also kind of affect the best deck in Wild, which was Beast Hunter. And so the 3 nerfs, 2 of them were to the Wild Spirits. So the Stag Spirit Wild Seed, this is the one that's dormant for 3 turns and gives you a weapon. So it had already been nerfed from a 4-2 weapon to a 3-2 weapon, and now its stats are getting nerfed from a 5-4 to a 4-3. And then the Bear, the Taunt, that's dormant for 2 turns, is going from a 2-5 to a 2-4. So this affects basically Arelon and Wild Spirits in Wild, because those are the 2 that were the most popular. And then if you were running kind of a Reno Hunter, it affected your Spirit Poacher as well. And then Harpoon Gun. So this is one that was very surprising. It lasted as long as it did after they buffed it. Because I remember when they buffed it, and we were just like, why did they do that? It's already insanely good. It has now been reverted to its original state, where if you dredge a beast to the top of your deck, you only reduce the cost by 2. So I don't know if you guys have played a ton of Beast Hunter post-patch. I know I played like 20 games day 1 of the patch, and I was very sad about these nerfs because Harpoon Gun, it seems kind of innocuous, I feel like, going from 3 to 2, but it does really hurt when you can't Hydra on 4. I know that's like the Omega high roll, right? But you're already kind of lacking on turn 4s, and then you don't get to do like 2 mana Shadehounds or 2 mana Tundra Rhinos or 4 mana Hydrolodons. So that part is relevant. In the Wild Spirits themselves, it feels like Arelon, maybe it wasn't even good enough to begin with. Probably not good enough now that it's had another set of, it's been nerfed by, I guess, 2/3. How are you guys feeling about the state of Hunter in Wild now?
I've seen 0 Beast Hunters playing Wild since the patch, and I haven't played any games with it myself. I used to love the deck. This was one of my favorite archetypes to sort of come up in Wild in a very long time. Absolutely loved it. In the same boat with Harpoon Gun. I think it's quite sad for Wild, to be honest. I think, it shouldn't have probably happened in the first place, but it feels really, really bad that it's been reverted. You know, a lot of the time it makes stuff 0, buzzards and pack mules and whatever, but that 2 mana Tundra Rhino for me is the massive one. Having that finisher, a whole turn later in most cases, or being able to combo it with like 1 minion less, perhaps not being able to play it, I don't know, when you've got your evasive maneuvers up from Tavish. There's so many situations that impacts. It's so much less damage, and with the new Shadehound, that's definitely the most devastating buff. Nerf. I wasn't playing Arelon in my Beast Hunter anyway. I wasn't a huge fan of him. He felt really bad to get off a lot of stuff. But yeah, the Wild Sea is just losing more stats. I'm not too sure about the impact of that. I haven't played the deck, but yeah, that's my general feelings. The Harpoon Gun, it's sad to see it go, but we probably need it to. The standard sins.
Yeah, most of the people I've talked to who've been playing Beast Hunter have, been talking about how horrible it feels, and like the reaction unplayable has come up. I don't know, like I played it a little bit and I thought it was fine. I think like Harpoon Gun, look, let's be honest, like 4 mana Hydrolodon is very, very silly and very, very stupid. And so like taking that away, I don't really feel like upset about that, because it was the biggest swingy, silliest thing in the deck. And I think the Harpoon Gun being a 2 mana discount, I feel like it's more appropriate. I think this is just like fine where it's at. I am a little bit sad about the Wild Seed nerf, because I wanted that stag to be a 4/4, and at 4/3, I think if it was a 4/4, I think you can keep playing Wild Spirits, but I think it might be a cut with the 4/3 stag, which is a pretty huge deal. So again, like Engine, I wasn't playing Arelon in any deck, so that Wild Spirits was the only one that's affected. So I might just be able to sub that out, put something back in. But I think Beast Hunter's going to be fine. Like, I think it'll be fine. I just think there was so much room for it to fall, because personally, before the patch happened, I thought Beast Hunter was like far and away the best deck in the format. I think there was a very clear margin. And if it's not feeling like that, and it's feeling more like a tier 2 deck, or a tier 3 deck, maybe, then that's like a dramatic fall off. Doesn't mean the deck's horrible. Doesn't mean the deck's terrible. It's just pretty bad compared to where it was, because it was so good. So I don't know. I'm generally pretty happy, like with the Harpoon change. Like it doesn't bother me. And I'm hoping that the deck is still quite competitive, and I expect it to be quite competitive as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit sad though when like that's the best deck, and it was like I think we've talked about on the podcast before, or at least in private, about like how we were super happy that was what the best deck in the WoW format was, right? Like it was skill testing. It felt fair to play against when you didn't get turn 4 Hydrolodon, right? And so I'm a little sad that it's no longer going to be kind of like the force that it was, right? Like I would much rather that be like the most. It was nowhere close to the most popular deck in the format, but like that's the deck that I wish would have stayed the most powerful. I think rather than something like, I don't even know what I would consider the best deck, right? Like Reno Priest or Big Priest or something. I don't know. I haven't even thought about it, right? But I'm assuming if Beast Hunter's no longer the most competitive, it's, I don't know, it's a little bit sad. It was a fun deck. I don't think anybody was complaining about it, and it's a little bit sad to see it kind of get caught up in the crossfire of Wild. That's kind of where I was going with this statement, that I kind of got lost to it along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think again, like we have talked about that. I think it's a great deck to have as one of the better decks in Wild. The Harpoon, like taking away the turn 4 Hydrolodon, it's like, yeah, that's a silly thing. And I think like in an ideal world, obviously multiple changes like that would happen in Wild, in my view. Where there would be multiple things that were taken away that were a little bit silly. So, you know, I guess to a degree, it's like it's always that did the end justify the means thing, where it's like, yeah, it's great. Like, I think where Meowth and I have talked previously, we kind of differ a little bit in our opinion on this, where Meowth, I think, not to put words too much in your mouth, but you'll find like with strategies being propped up by something that's a little silly, if it means that, you know, more stuff is viable or like the deck is viable, whereas I'm personally a little bit more against some of the, I think like the high rolly or the drawn, like 2-card combo type stuff.
I'm only okay with it because it's present everywhere, right? And if like
Exactly,
other classes get to have it, I feel like classes like, or a deck like Beast Hunter should also get to have it, right? If that's what makes it competitive. So that's to finish putting words in my mouth. I don't know, Engine, how do you kind of lie on that argument, even before we kind of dive into the Hunter?
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is I hope they revert this. I'm fine with this kind of thing existing, and I'd agree that I never felt at all resentful when I ever queued into this deck. It felt fun to play against, even when I lost. There was a lot of back and forth happened, and it's skill testing, right? Packages propping up decks. I don't know quite how I feel about that. The thing which came to mind instantly is just I hate Flurgle Talks. That's something which I wish would get booted the same way this did.
Agreed.
Yeah. But I mean, at the end of the day, unless they do that nerfing of a bunch of cards like they've done to Harpoon Gun, specifically for Wild, those are going to be necessary to have the format we have. I mean, how would Shaman do without Flurgle Talks? Probably okay, but it's propped up these slower strategies for a while. I mean, it's not quite the same scenario, but if Raza went back to 1-mana hero power, would Reno Priest be as good? Probably not. Probably would be a lot worse. A lot worse. So I'm a fan of them overall. Yeah, I just wish if they'd like get some of them out the same way they've done with Harpoon Gun.
Yeah, you've addressed the Beast Hunter one. Now let's address the ones in Druid and Warlock and Shaman and everything like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's take a little bit of a step back. Let's talk about the cards that were nerfed, right? Big picture, wild meta. Beast Hunter, right, is the big one. Beast Hunter kind of getting knocked down a few pegs. What do you guys think is the ripple effect of Beast Hunter being worse? And I think my initial impression is like the matchup against Reno Priest was a big thing, right? It was really good into Reno Priest, and that bad matchup going away for Reno Priest, even though they're losing a little bit of power in Theotar, they're losing a whole really bad matchup in Beast Hunter. I say lose it, like it might stick around, but it'll be a better matchup than it used to be. So that's kind of my initial impression. I don't know if you guys have kind of a follow up to that.
I mean, the truth is, I don't think there is much ripple effect. Like, Beast Hunter was not played very much, even though I think a lot of people thought it was very, very strong. Even at High Legend, people didn't, like, I only started seeing it more in the last couple days. Like, literally, the last few days I started running into mirrors and things like that. But before that, Beast Hunter was still, like, I don't know. If I looked at my, like, 200 or something games I played over a few weeks, it was probably like 2% of the meta, or something like that, like absolutely small. So I don't think there is an impact. I just think it's like the same old stuff that we were kind of seeing before the patch, whether you're running into even Shaman or Reno Priest or Big Priest or whatever, it's gonna be the same stuff. Like, I don't think there is any ripple.
I would say in my pocket meta there will be, but overall, a lot of people said, "Oh, Beast Hunter." That's a pretty novel idea, so I agree with the low play rate. I mean, again, we play on different servers, right? But specifically in my pocket meta, where I play around like rank 50 to 100 at the moment most of the time, there was a lot of Beast Hunter, and I was in top 50 last week, and it was Reno Priest, Beast Hunter, and Mildred, and that was basically all I played against. And a lot of those Reno Priest games, I definitely think it's quite a win for Reno Priest. Those games came down to such tight margins sometimes. If you played the matchup perfectly as Reno Priest, it often came down to like one turn you needed. And if they can't play that Tundra Rhino combo, if it's one turn later, that's absolutely massive for that particular matchup. Whether it happens a lot is a different question, but yes, it's absolutely huge for the matchup, because it often felt like you were dying just a tiny bit, too early, like literally 1 mana, and that's what's happened. It's a 1 mana nerf or more to that charge combo that's going to come down. So yeah, specifically for me, I'm happy as a priest spammer, but yeah.
We invited one of those on the podcast. Ew, gosh.
Sorry.
I will say, I feel like for the majority of the WoW player base, right, that's hang out on Diamond or lower Legend, probably not going to feel the impact of this, right? Because I don't think it was very widespread outside of kind of higher Legend.
It got crushed beneath the endless tides, should we say?
Exactly, right? Very good transition engine. Let's talk about the stuff that wasn't nerfed. I don't know if you guys have been on the subreddit at all the past couple of days. People
really have to be pissed.
People are pissed. Yeah, that's. Let's be blunt. People are pissed off that yet again, Big Priest not touched. Yeah, I understand. I empathize. I'm not surprised. Right, and I don't think either of you two are. Anybody that listens to this podcast probably shouldn't be, but that doesn't make people any less pissed, and I completely understand it. And again, I just wish they would have just include a damn sentence or two about Wild, and we're keeping an eye on it, and this is why we haven't nerfed it. What's going on?
Well, I don't know what the stats are, but cool. What's the rough play rate of Big Priest? My impression is it's one of the most popular decks in Wild, and always has been when it's been viable. You see it all the time, especially at lower ranks, right? Not high ranks, but I don't know what the stats are, but I feel like I see it all the time, and it's a fan favorite, right? It has been for a very, very long time, and I think it's no secret that they don't especially keep an eye on play pattern issues in Wild as much as perhaps they should. They did for Big Rogue, and I hear the argument of all the time, what's the difference between Big Rogue with an Illusionist on 3 or 2 and Big Priest do high rolls, coin Essence, and into an Epsilon? Isn't it just the same thing? But I don't know, Big Priest feels like it's beaten by a lot of decks. And so it's also probably not a win rate issue, I shouldn't think. So I don't know where they come from on nerfing it, really. Or what their reason to do it would be, apart from community outrage, which we haven't seen on a scale really since Demon Seed, I'd say.
Any Barnes?
Yeah. Well, Demon Seed was partially there as well, right? That was an outpouring on social media that led to that banning, and we just don't see it from anywhere but Reddit, really. You don't see people on Twitter really complaining about it. You see Mediocre hitting rank 1 and a lot of memes about it. That's more what the thing with Big Priest seems to be.
Yeah, the Big Priest play rate stuff, I don't know, it's about where it's been for a little while now. It's 10-11% of Upper Diamond, which is popular. It's a little bit behind Secret Mage, but not super overwhelming. But I don't know, I hate Big Priest. If I queued into Big Priest and it was my second most popular deck, and I was getting turned to Nepulon every, once a play session, I'd be pissed. So I get it. I get why people want it changed. But at the same time, like Meowth said, I did not expect it to be changed because, we've talked about a ton, the threshold for what Blizzard require for Wild intervention is very, very high. I think it's too high, but I thought it was quite clear. Again, Big Priest didn't meet whatever standards that they have. Not popular enough, not strong enough. And there's clearly not enough crying on Reddit. So, you guys got to up your numbers if you really want it nerfed.
Wait, Corb, you said you wanted this deck nerfed? I heard 10 different times opposite on Reddit that you were defending it and that it was fine. It didn't need to be nerfed, and that if you were good enough, you could beat it. Yeah, that's
Did
what
I
read.
say that? Okay. Well, I would hate to put my own words in my own mouth if someone else could do it for me. So,
Yeah, I again, we've said multiple times on the podcast. So we understand the outrage about Big Priest. We are not defending the deck. We would love to see it nerfed just as much as anybody else. I think we're also just very realistic and understand that Blizzard's not going to do anything about it. And so we're not expecting any changes as much as we might wish for it, right? I don't know what it would take at this point to get Blizzard to step in. Like, outside of, like, another ad purchase on Reddit. Like, I don't know.
No, I mean, the actual answer is, like, the deck would have to get more popular and stronger. Like, it would need to look like more of an issue. And it's kind of like why Big Rogue got acted upon so quickly. It's because Big Rogue, if you're keeping an eye on things like the days leading up to when they kind of had to lock in that patch, Big Rogue was looking really stupid. Like, really, really stupid. It was, it had already like leapfrogged and become like the clearly most popular deck. It looked like it was probably the best deck at Diamond and things like that. And while Big Priest is solid, it's quite popular. It's not quite at that levels, and so it's kind of. I think that there was a very big risk as well for what Big Rogue was going to do to the format compared to what Big Priest is still doing. Big Rogue was also a lot more consistent in its silliness. Like 8/8s coming down on turn 3 was like the normal thing. And don't get me wrong, Neptune on turn 2 or turn 3, super tilting, but it doesn't happen every game. So there are slight differences here as to why Big Rogue kind of got immediately stomped on. And, why Big Priest is allowed to live, sadly.
Yeah, you heard it here first, guys. Corb advocating for more people to play Big Priest.
No.
So when you see it on ladder, it's Corb's fault.
I thought you were about to say, like, once again, Corb defending why we shouldn't nerf Big Priest. I thought that's where that was going. But play more Big Priest, guys. If you want it nerfed, play more of it.
Yeah,
I would
Corb's
play more
Discord,
of it.
Get a good Big Priest list, and then spam that.
Yeah, I would play more of it, but I just don't know how to play the deck. Can you write me a guide, perhaps? I think that might be needed.
I think I know someone who can help you out with that. Just a person.
All right, guys. Sorry that Big Priest isn't nerfed. Maybe next balance patch we'll finally
next
see
patch
some
for
intervention.
sure. Yeah,
Let me
next
grab
patch
my
they'll
copium.
definitely do it. It'd have to be
Copium.
crazy not to.
Well, it's the same patch as the Wild Open, right? 24.6.8. It's coming soon.
That's what they're so excited about on Twitter, Engine. They keep pumping up the 24.6 patch. It's because they're all huge Wild Open fans.
Yep, it's the Wild Open. Yep. Only explanation.
It's the only possible
Yeah, the only
explanation.
one.
All right, let's talk about kind of the other big one, the big elephant in the room, which is Renathal. So in the patch notes, I'm going to just read this out real quick here. So one notable outlier that's not getting changed, but which we're keeping a close eye on, is Prince Renathal. He is powerful and popular, but we don't want this patch to completely shake up the meta because we have something fun coming in patch 24.6, and we want to see how Renathal performs in the next expansion before making changes to him. So like Corb was rattling off some numbers earlier. I think prior to the patch, Renathal was in about 60% of standard decks, which is kind of insane. And I think in Wild was teetering about 40% of Wild decks, maybe even higher apparently. So people are talking about nerfs. This specific comment here led to some very interesting Twitter threads. So if you guys want to catch up on that, I'm sure there's some like TLDRs on Reddit about about these threads. If you dare venture into the hellhole that is Reddit. I guess this is just a really interesting conversation about Renathal. Let's have our own Twitter thread right here on the podcast. So I was talking about this a little bit with some people in my community about feelings about Renathal, and I know on the podcast, Roffle and I didn't remember what Corb said, so I wasn't gonna put words in his mouth. But I remember Roffle and I talking about how Renathal is a success, right? Because of how much people absolutely love the card. the casual player base absolutely loves Prince Renathal, right? And as long as it didn't become a power level issue, it was a very successful card to print, right? And I think I still stand by that. It seems to be, though, that the whole power issue thing might be becoming a relevant thing in Standard. I don't think it's becoming a relevant thing in Wild, but it does seem to be becoming a relevant thing in Standard, which is where this kind of conversation is popping up. So I guess it brings up this really, really interesting question about like catering towards kind of maybe your casual audience, which absolutely loves the card, versus maybe the 0.1% of competitive players who think Renathal is not that great. And I know, Corb, you've maybe had some ideas about, I've heard you throw out this idea of like homogenization of deck lists, which we can maybe dive into as well. But kind of just like opening the floor here about Prince Renathal and kind of like how we're feeling about the card just in general.
Yeah, I think the card overall has been a tremendous success, like you've said, in terms of people really want to play it. Like, this is something that people want to do. They're excited about. And I don't think it necessarily matters for a lot of people how good the card is. They are going to put this in their deck. And from a design perspective, it's like, okay, sure, like that's a hit, right? Like, you want people to do stuff even if it's not oppressively strong. Like, you want them to be excited and things like that. So that's good. But this kind of like the thing that I'm kind of struggling with in dissecting, like, is Renathal a quote-unquote problem, is that it's so overwhelmingly overlapping with every other card in the format in Standard and even in Wild, where it's hard to like piece together. Is the problem is an issue like Renathal, or is it Denathrius, which is enabled by Renathal, or is it Theotar, which kind of helps enable these Renathal decks, or is it like, and it kind of keeps snowballing, you know, like, or is it the lack of late game combo synergy stuff, you know, as we've had a very, very change in the types of sets that we've been getting compared to Stormwind to the last couple, right? Voyage and Castle Nathria, very, very kind of less synergistic, less mana cheating, less card draw. There's a lot more like on curve board-based gameplay, and it kind of makes me wonder like how much of the problems or the popularity of Renathal is linked more to the types of cards that we've been getting for the past two sets and the incredible amount of nerfs to late game lethality and synergy, or is it just that Renathal is always going to be like this popular? And it's kind of hard for me to figure out exactly what's going on there. But I think again, like, overall, I would say it's a success. I don't think Renathal is necessarily a problem. Initially, I was quite pissed off because I didn't really like where like Renathal was getting the meta to trend towards. Because, like Meowth said, there is just like a lot of homogeny between the decks right now, right? That you see in Standard. A lot of Standard decks play the exact kind of same shell where they're all just like curving out with big fat mid-range minions into Denathrius, Insatiable Devour, Brand. Like, it's all kind of the same stuff. And nothing... Renathal kind of doesn't want you to have decks that are as synergistic, and it wants you to play decks that are more standalone good stuff. Because if you have more cards in your deck and you're not drawing your stuff consistently, then why would, like, your synergies don't make as much sense. And to me personally, I think like the 30 card version of decks that are more synergistic are a lot more interesting. Like, I think 30 card Spooky Mage is a lot cooler than the 40 card version. I think like a 30 card version of Hunter looks a lot more fun and cool than the 40 card version. And the same thing is true for like all these 40 card decks. And so I kind of prefer highly synergistic stuff. It's kind of why I play Wild. It's actually what kicked me out of Standard for a while, because Standard, they were kind of like moving on from a lot of the stuff. And then Wild, I want to play all these big dumb synergistic high roll-y stuff. It's kind of what I was here for. So for me personally, Renathal is not my preference, but at the same time, I recognize that a lot of people, you know, really like it. Maybe too many people, actually.
Yeah, just to clarify, you were talking about like Spooky Mage and Hunter in Standard.
In Standard,
yeah.
Yes. In Wild, Renathal is mostly a Reno card, it feels like, and I think it's less of an issue in Wild. Like, usually when I'm talking about like design and things like that, I'm thinking about Standard because they don't design for Wild. And so it's kind of like, it's hard for me to ever critique them for design if it's not even the goal. It's like, it'd be kind of weird for me to be like, oh, you only ran the 100-meter dash in X amount of time when the person was actually climbing a tree. Like, the goals aren't aligned there, so it doesn't make sense to criticize them for that.
Do you want to jump in your engine?
Yeah. So I love Renathal. I don't know if I'd go as far to say it's the best thing they've done in the game this year or in the last year or two, but I'd say it's close. I personally am a fan of giving more ways to play back to the audience. I think Renathal has done that more than most things have done, regardless of whether that is my preference. I'm not a huge fan of the 40 card jank piles that play on curve myself, but I do really like that it's given people who want to play that something to do. I think variation is a net positive across the format, whichever way you look at it, both in terms of the amount of decks that are viable and in in terms of actual games. If you play against Arena Breach, you don't usually get absolutely flattened in the same way each time. It's usually something different, because in Wild they have that breadth of stuff available to them. In Standard, I have to admit I haven't touched it, because exactly what Corb said, it feels so clunky. And I think Renathal is part of what does that. I tried to get to Legend in Standard. I tried to make a habit of doing it every single month, and I just couldn't bring myself to play past Platinum. It was the same. It's the same cards every single game, and I honestly just got so bored of it. It's the worst. It's the worst Standard experience I've had, including Stormwind. Stormwind release I actually quite enjoyed, even though I hate most of what the set stands for personally and what it's done to Wild. I absolutely loved playing Standard in Stormwind. Hand buff Paladin, it was so much fun to play. It was so synergistic for me. I really enjoyed that. I mean, I had 1 mana Conviction and 5 mana Battlemaster. I mean, there's a bit. I think most people would enjoy casting those 2 cards. But that was so much fun. But I can't touch Standard at the moment because of that homogenous feeling. I really don't like it, but I tend to lean more towards the fact that is an issue with the cards, the neutral card pool, rather than Renathal itself. I very much lean into that. I play a few other card games. I see the same sort of cards in them, and I think the issue is more tied to the cards that surround it than those cards. Thinking Yorion, for those of you who play Magic, and especially his impact in Eternal formats. But yeah, Renathal, I really don't hope they change the essence of the card. I think, you could make it like a 10 mana 1/1 or something, I don't know. So he's absolutely useless in your hand. But I really hope they don't change the base effect of the card. I think one of the most telling things to me about it is a streamer that got me into Hearthstone, Forsen. He recently went back and tried to get Legend in Standard. He loaded up the game, got Prince Renathal on his open screen, and he said, why didn't they do this back when I was playing? This gets so many people into the game, this kind of card, both casual and competitive, because it offers more ways to play. But he stopped playing Whispers of the Old God because of all the RNG. But he said, why didn't they do this earlier on? This is just a net positive. But yeah, in Standard, I think Denathrius, Theotar, School Teacher's another one which stands out to me, actually. It's not just these powerful late game finishers. Things like School Teacher is in so many different Standard decks and has been since it's kind of half on nerf, right? Things like that just are the problem, in my opinion, my humble opinion. I really hope they don't change Renathal. And I was very surprised to see it in the patch notes, to be honest. I was surprised to see that. I didn't think they'd actually do it, and I don't think they will. Cross fingers.
Yeah, I very much think that it's an issue of all the other win conditions in Standard being nerfed, and so every Standard deck runs. Because when we were talking about numbers, right? You said Renathal was up there with the Theotar, Brand, and Denathrius, and it's like every deck in Standard is a Brand Denathrius deck, right? Like that's what Standard is, and I feel like the reason I haven't touched Standard in like 6 months is like every time there's something interesting, they nerf it to the ground, right? Rather than buffing other cards. And so it feels like there are no win conditions in Standard, which is like interesting to me with like Renathal. Like if you compare Renathal in Standard to Renathal in Wild, right? If you had to mention like the top 7 or 8 decks in Wild, I think one of them is a Renathal deck, maybe Druid, right? I'm thinking Reno Priest and maybe Reno Druid. If I had to like name off the top of my head what I thought the best 7 or 8 decks was. It's not a Renathal problem that's creating this issue in Standard. I think it's a lack of viable or a variety of win conditions in Standard. And so what I could see them doing potentially is like they're not going to touch it for this upcoming expansion. They've already kind of said that, right? Like they want to see how he performs in this new patch and this new expansion. What I could see them doing is I could see them pulling a Ganon Baku and kind of just Hall of Faming the card early from Standard, which is I would much rather have them do that than try to do like 40 cards, 35 light. Like I'd rather them instead of nerfing it, just like rotate him if he's still a problem in Standard after all of these things. But I would love to see them actually just like shift their philosophy and stop nerfing everything that's interesting in Standard, because I'm a little bit biased. Like the stuff that's really powerful and interesting in Standard also happens to be playable sometimes in Wild. I hate seeing stuff that's potentially playable in Wild that's new get nerfed. And so instead of like I know this is a dichotomy of opinions on Twitter as well, where if you bring this up, you're going to get some more Twitter threads that are angry. But I think you get... I would rather have buffs, right, to cards. And I know that's a little bit more dangerous, and I know it's a lot harder to do. But I think when you nerf everything to the ground, you end up in a situation like this, where every deck is 40 cards, because the best cards are this neutral package of Insatiable Devourer, Brand, Denathrius, Theotar, School Teacher, like, and those are the best cards in the format because you've nerfed everything else that's interesting, right? Like, I don't think you need to go back to combo in Standard, but that again, this is me just watching Standard. I haven't played it in 6 months because I feel the same way as in Jin. It's boring, and so I don't want to do it. But I am also with you. I think the card was very good for the casual player base, and I think that's a huge dub for the design team. And I don't want them to mess that up. And I think as popular as it is, I'm okay with it being super popular if it's not a super big balance problem, right? Like I mentioned at the very beginning of this whole conversation. And in Wild, I don't think he is. Standard, he might be at this point, but I don't think it's because of Renathal, and I think it's because of the surrounding tools, like we mentioned.
Yeah, it's interesting that like the amount of late game decks in Standard that just default to 40 cards, compared to the amount that actually want 30. And if you kind of like look at why that is, it mostly just comes down to that lack of synergistic lethality. And you can look at a deck like Fel Relic Demon Hunter. That's like a late game deck that plays 30 cards, you know, but it doesn't even like I think the last VS list that came out, they actually like cut the Denathrius and things like that. It's running this relic package, and it's running this relic package along with Jace. And it's like, all right, you got like some building blocks there, you know, for some late game powerful things. And it just doesn't have to fold back onto this default Renathal, Bran, Denathrius thing, you know, like this exact same package that we've been seeing across all these archetypes. And so yeah, I think that Stormwind, I feel like it always comes back to Stormwind, right? Because Stormwind was this catalyst where Stormwind was about as extreme of a set and extreme as a format as we've ever seen. For me personally, I liked Stormwind, like after they got out of that first like patch or two when they had to nerf Stealer and things like that. I think from then on, Stormwind was really fun. But I also think that it was about as extreme as you can have Standard be. You know, like Garrote Rogue was very cool to me, but also very silly. You know, the Demon Hunter quest stuff was also kind of nutty. And I think I get why there was a desire to kind of pull back from that and swing the other way. But I think that the last two sets have swung the pendulum so far in the other direction, and it's kind of just made this really, really boring Standard format. And I think like we do have to see what is going to be in the third set, because if they do get enough synergistic stuff and like the decks become a little bit more, you know, have lethality and things like that, I think Renathal could definitely be subdued. But if the last set is another set where, you know, maybe they lean into Highlander support and things like that, I don't think Renathal is going to be going anywhere. And then the question also becomes, okay, what does that look like the next year? Once Stormwind and things like that are rotated out and you're kind of left with Voyage, Nathria, as the foundation blocks, then what do you have to do? Do you have to rotate Renathal if the format is going to be that low power? And so, yeah, overall, I think like sitting and waiting on it is fine. And I don't really necessarily think it's a Renathal problem, but I do want to see what happens once he gets, you know, another card pool Because it has only been one expansion, really. It has only been one expansion with Renathal. Like, maybe it's just this issue and not a forever issue.
Yeah, it felt like a little bit of whiplash, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
I remember complaining and bitching about Stormwind and Wild, but I agree with you guys. Stormwind and Standard was a lot of fun. The most that I've ever played Standard was Garrote Rogue during Stormwind. In Wild, it was an absolute shit show, and it shouldn't, like, I still think that, like,
Don't remind me.
we're coming up on reversions. I swear to God, if we get any quest lines reverted, I'm going to be so pissed. That's a story for a different time. But
Demon Seed. Can
can you imagine Demon Seed?
You're hurting Engine.
By the way. Anyways, like I think Stormwind was great in Standard. I think it was absolute shit show in Wild. I think Renathal is the opposite, right? Where it's an absolute shit show in Standard, and I think it's absolutely great for Wild. And I don't know. I think I'm feeling very jaded at this point of the conversation of, like, I'm really tired of them just, like, taking all the sweet stuff that they've done that's impactful in Wild and having him get, like, nerfed into the ground, because like what's the point of printing new stuff then, right? If you're just going to eventually nerf it and we're going to be playing Neutral Stone in both formats, like, not in both formats, but, like, I'm just sick and tired of the new stuff getting nerfed, and I really hope Renathal doesn't join that pile.
Yeah. What needs to happen is not going to happen, though. I think everything that Corb has mentioned, everything to do with Renathal, I think at the very base of it, and this includes Stormwind and everything else, boils down to the fact that there is no, I'm going to say it, no format primer for Wild, and no definitive format primer for Standard. Almost every other card game says we want our Eternal format to be a turn 4 to 6 format. We want our Standard format to be a turn 8 format or whatever, and they design very much around that. We don't get this huge fluctuation that we saw, from Kobolds through to Rastakan's Rumble was the last big one, right? And then from now we've had Stormwind to Nathria. We don't get these huge fluctuations in Standard. I think if people knew what to expect and didn't get this highly synergistic format into an absolute slogfest, into synergistic format, I think it'd take a lot of fatigue out of Hearthstone, because if they wanted that highly synergistic format, they could fall back to Wild, where they know, the rough expectation here, and it would be balanced, they're going to balance around it, is that I will die on average, if I do nothing, turn 4 to 6 or whatever, because that's what Wizards do with Legacy and Magic and all of that. They say, oh yeah, we think you'll die then, and we'll balance around that accordingly, and that's our format definition, and therefore they design cards for Standard to adhere to the rough expectation of what Standard is, and Modern because they insert cards, right? It's interesting, the question of whether we'll get a Wild exclusive set later on, and whether they'll do something of that line then, and maybe come with a balance patch, who knows. But I think that is actually more of a root problem, and part of the reason why it feels so bad when things get nerfed and buffed, because these sets have such a huge discrepancy between what they're actually trying to do to the game, and there's no real expected standard, and yeah, it annoys me.
Yeah, and I think that's totally true, and it all comes down to that word Meowth said, just whiplash. Like, going from these extremes, like one set then to the next, like, it can be very jarring. Where a lot of time no one ends up very happy, right? Because the extremes are so silly that, like, I go from a format that I'm really liking Stormwind, and the next set comes out and it's absolute hell. Like, I don't want to touch the format, by the time we rotate, and it becomes accentuated just because they are so extremely different there. There was one other thing I was going to point out, but I forgot. Don't worry. Don't worry. Got distracted.
Got lost. Yeah, I don't know. We've talked a lot about Standard, I think, with this Renathal conversation, but I think a lot of it is directly related to Wild, right?
Yeah.
Because what they do in Standard to these new cards directly affects us in Wild, because we don't have separate versions of cards. We don't have a separate and things like that. And so that's why it sounds like we're talking a lot about Standard, because their decisions for Standard have kind of resulted in the nerfs that we've seen the past 4 or 5 months, and probably will see in the future if Theotar and Renathal continue to be issues, which is a little, I don't know. man, what do you think is going to happen to the casual player base if they nerf Renathal? At least in Wild, right? Like, what are you gonna how do you justify that when, like,
it'll be a
90%
social
of the
media
people
storm.
Are
PR
playing Renathal
disaster.
Yeah.
It would be a disaster for them. I really do think that.
Yeah. God. Anyways, we talked a lot about cards that didn't get nerfed with Big Priest and Renathal, but I don't know. It was a very productive conversation. I got a lot out of it. That was fun.
Well, I mean, you did say we had to do our own Renathal tweet thread, and maybe we weren't quite that long, but we do have a couple of hours that we could keep going if you want to do a full Twitter thread.
The real question is if we're Reddit recap worthy after that conversation.
Oh, I hope not.
Yeah. I do agree with the point that Injin made up, because that's not something I feel like we've talked about before on the podcast, of like defining that standard is always going to be a certain, like, if you aren't doing anything productive, you are going to die on like turn 7, turn 8, right? And we kind of pivot from like dying on turn 3 or turn 4 to dying on turn 75 because of Denathrius and Renathal.
Every game.
And so I don't know. Obviously they won't ever give like set hard kind of outlines, because the moment that it's not in there, they get flamed on Reddit. And like, just like when people, I don't know, do you guys still see people quote that class weaknesses article that they posted like 5 years ago?
Druid's weakness to big minions.
Yeah. Druid's weakness is board clearing. I still remember that one.
Yep.
Shaman card draw and everything like that. So yeah, I can see why they're never going to, but yeah. All right.
I think it's interesting to look back on that, but the game has changed so much, and it will continue to do so.
I will say I think it's changed very much for the better over the past few years. Very very much for the better. Again, my one qualm. Again, at this point, since we're saying it, like I'm very pissed that they keep nerfing stuff for Standard, and it keeps deleting all the interesting cards in Standard, and therefore deleting all the interesting cards in Wild. Like it's very annoying that they do that, and I really wish they would, because it felt like there was a shift in the philosophy to not do that. Especially when we started seeing those like massive waves of buffs where we would get like 10 to 12 buffs. And like you'd get like 3 or 4 nerfs in that first patch, and you would see like 10 or 12 buffs. And it feels like we've kind of pivoted away from that, which is a little frustrating.
I feel like there's always... Yeah, sorry.
Like there has been some discussion about how that first patch of a set used to be strictly for emergencies, but then due to some timing, they started just making it the patch where they would just rip stuff off, and that's kind of what happened with Snowfall, and they buffed Edwin. Just because they didn't have enough information at the time, and then they just did that, and then they kind of ruined Standard for a month. Like that's just what happened. That's the reality of the situation. So they probably need to go back a little bit more to having it as a bit more of a emergency button rather than an expectation that there has to be a balance patch in the first like 10 days, and things like that. And the thing is, like, the design team, like, they're obviously very talented people. What they do, like, they're all, you know, at this, you know, AAA company and things like that. Like, they're working on a world-class game. They're going to be learning things from set to set, I imagine. I think, like, Alec Dawson, when he was on the team, like, he did an interview where he talked a lot about what the team learned, where they introduced, they wanted to introduce, like, lots of card draw to Standard, because you know, we were talking about how class weaknesses had Shaman as card draw, but then all of a sudden Shaman would get stranded on having no cards in hand, and it was just the same thing every game. And so the idea was, look, if players can play cards, it's more fun. So they gave lots of card draw, but they also gave lots of mana cheating with Flow and Rod, and they kind of learnt the lesson where a card like Rod probably wasn't that bad in, you know, 2019 or something, like if there's not as much card draw in the format. Same with Flow. But they kind of learnt the lesson about mass mana cheating and card draw at the same time equals bad. And so, you know, they reevaluated that. And it's the same kind of thing where, like, Cora gave that, at this point, somewhat infamous quote with the Avatar reference, where she was talking about how aggro, mid-range control and combo all, you know, lived in harmony. And then combo had to go sit in the corner for a few weeks or a few months or something. And it does make me wonder whether they're going to look back on the last couple expansions and realize, okay, we went way too far in this direction. Like, we should not have gutted combo strategies this hard. We should not have, like, lent towards making the game as board based. and we need to reevaluate and change things in the future. So that might not be seen immediately in this upcoming set, but maybe for the sets after that, you know, like in the coming year, they're going to be able to look back and sort of change some of the design philosophies, and you know, hopefully, you know, the game is going to change as Engine said, and hopefully it's going to be for the better in the future.
I think we'll just get it as time goes on, right? Hearthstone at its base is quite a simple game, and I think, well, in terms of, I say that, I mean that in a very loose term. Right, compared to some other card games, the mechanical limitations of Hearthstone are quite narrow. You know, you don't have playing another opponent's turn, stuff like that. The scope for interaction is low, which means that things like that combo decks being Ascendant is so hard to manage. You know, you can't really have that trifecta of aggro keeping combo in check, combo keeping control in check, and control keeping aggro in check. It's in Hearthstone. It's usually one thing is overbearing, and echo stop. Sorry, I woke up my echo. Edit that out. It's like telling me the weather. Yeah, that trifecta, the one archetype overbearing, the other light happened in Stormwind is so hard to balance out, and they have to do that go sit in a corner thing, and I don't like that because I like my metagames my balanced out metagames where I can kind of pick up different things. In other card games, I'm a combo deck player. Yeah, in Hearthstone, I almost exclusively play slow strategies as my preference. I find that very, very strange. But there's less moving parts and less chance for innovation and all that. And I mean, we can see things added to Hearthstone in the future, and yeah, they'll come up with that. You know, we're always going to be working on new features, a new class, or whatever. A graveyard mechanic would be amazing. Something like that. Yeah, it'll open up more space, and that's why I'm always optimistic about Hearthstone's future. It changes so much, and it's also exciting when you think about what they could do, and that's why I love the game.
But yeah, I think that's gonna kind of wrap it up for this week's episode. Lots of fun. And Jen, thank you for filling in for Roffle this week. It was
thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Guys, let Jen know whether you love him or absolutely love him down in the comments below, and let the people know where they can find you and your content outside of the podcast.
So I'm on Twitch mainly at twitch.tv/n_Jin. I post on Twitter a lot as well, and I'm starting to post on YouTube, so those are the main places to find me.
And Corb, thank you again for joining me week after week. Let the people know where they can find you. And again, thanks for you and Roffle for hosting the past couple of episodes when I was out sick. I don't think I actually said thank you live, but thanks for hosting.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to have you back. You guys can find me at Corbettgames on Twitter and YouTube, and Corbett on Twitch. And yeah, thank you so much, Engine, for coming on the show. I think this is a great episode, so thank you so much.
Yep. You guys can find me at Get Me Up on all those platforms. Thanks for everybody listening all the way to the end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the conversations, or didn't, because we talked about how they weren't going to nerf Big Priest, and I completely understand that. But hopefully you enjoyed everything else, the discussion about the nerfs and Theotar and Renathal and everything like that. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. We will see you guys again next time. Have a good one.